Get in, losers. We're going on an archetypal journey. Welcome, Terra Fam, and thank you for joining me for this short lecture and video essay on the folklore of fear, the evolution of the killer clown motif. My name is Amelia Cotter, and I'm an author, researcher, and storyteller with a special interest in the supernatural, history, and folklore. I really hit the jackpot with this opportunity because I'm already working on a larger folklore of fear project around the dualities and perceptions of the animals, people, places, and things we fear the most, with clowns being one of them. I first became fascinated with clowns and the art and history of clowning through my research into the haunted history of Baraboo, Wisconsin, particularly the old Baraboo Inn. Baraboo is most well known for being the hometown and former winter quarters of the Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus from 1884 through 1918. Baraboo was also home to a number of notable circus acts in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, earning it the moniker Circus City. At least one ghost clown can be seen around the old Baraboo Inn, but that's a story for another day. As I told our gracious conference hosts, there may never be another time when my useless knowledge of clown history will actively be solicited for academic purposes, so here we go. As we all know by now, the Terrifier franchise has evolved from a lovable, low-budget indie horror gem to the highest-grossing unrated film of all time and #1 movie at the US box office, developing beloved characters, iconic imagery, and what I will delicately refer to as a very dedicated fan base along the way. With this, the spotlight on the killer clown trope has grown blindingly bright. From the gripping, creepy clown craze of 2016, the year Terrifier first premiered, to Art the Clown as sex symbol, the perception of clowns in and outside of horror has changed dramatically over time and rapidly in the last decade. In this presentation, we are going to very briefly and very broadly explore clowns in history, lore, and mythology while bringing the Terrifier franchise into context with our time. I'll be joined by my special guest, Ari Spence, with insight from my friends Bailey Camien and Arts Horror. I want you to go forth from this lecture with a deeper appreciation and understanding of clowns and the killer clown motif, and I want to challenge you to unmask the clown within, the kind sitting dormant and covered in cobwebs in the attic of all of our psyches. So, let's begin with the changing social roles of clowns throughout history. What are clowns? The history of clowns and clowning is complex and fascinating. There are many different terms for clown, including buffoon, fool, harlequin, jester, joker, mime, pierrot, trickster, and many more. Historically, clowns have served an esteemed theatrical role aimed at reversing or subverting folkway norms, and these roles have transformed over time alongside cultural, political, and societal shifts. The most recognizable clowns to us modern Westerners are probably birthday and circus clowns, which represent a deviation from the traditional clown role. They're still entertaining, and to be clear, clowns have always been and have meant to be a bit unsettling, but modern clowns have kind of lost their depth of meaning, unless, of course, you're a horror fan. In the ancient world, as early as 2400 BCE, we see clown-like roles in ancient Egyptian society performed for religious and social purposes, often by priests. Ancient Greek and Roman theater almost always included a rustic buffoon character. Indigenous North American cultures had ritual clowns, such as the Pueblos or Pueblo clowns who represented jesters and tricksters. Speaking of jesters, we most often associate jesters with the English royal court, but these figures also date back to ancient times and are represented in cultures around the world. Jesters played a special role as the king's companion, confidant, and privileged critic. Jester's privilege refers to the ability and right of a jester to deliver bad news, mock, or question the king and court without being punished. The court jester's outfit is one of the most readily available images of the clown in history and is full of important symbols. The jester's cap and bells are a subversion of the crown and represent hard truths delivered with like a lighthearted edge. The marat, with a mini jester on top, represents the king's scepter and the duality of the self, which we'll come back to again later. The motley pattern of the jester's clothing demonstrates organized chaos, which is the nature of both the jester and of life itself. Like the wit inherent in the banter of clowns, for the jester there is always wisdom in the jest. Clowns first became stock characters in 17th century English theater, often portrayed as quick-witted rustic buffoons, restless and playful, popping up all over the stage, always a part of the action or there to help create it. The Shakespearean clown, or fool or jester, symbolized the king's alter ego, notably in King Lear, where he possesses a kingly wisdom that Lear doesn't attain himself until the end of the play. The origin of the modern clown derives from the Italian commedia dell'arte, a popular style of art and theater throughout Europe from the 16th through 18th centuries. Commedia dell'arte was characterized by masked and unmasked social types and stock characters, a term I've already used, that both highlighted and exaggerated prototypical human figures, such as the tough guy who really has the false bravado, or the servant who secretly rebels. And these characters and these theater plays utilized both scripted and unscripted material. This era also introduces us to the Harlequin, popularized by the Italian actor Tristano Martinelli in Paris in the late 16th century. The Harlequin is clever, lighthearted, nimble, and wears a brightly checkered costume, often during this time with a mask. In the late 17th century, we meet the Pierrot, who we know today as the sad clown. He is sterner and more serious, and dressed in a billowing white or black and white clothing with a white painted face and no mask. Sometimes the Pierrot appears with a wide-brimmed hat or a dunce cap, and to me, Art the Clown most closely resembles the Pierrot in makeup and costume, although perhaps not always in personality. In the late 19th century, we are introduced to the Dummer August, or clumsy August character, which emerges as the template for the modern image of the hobo clown, made infamous by the 1892 Italian opera Pagliacci, which means clowns. The prototype for the appearance of the modern clown with exaggerated white makeup and red nose and red hair was Joseph Grimaldi, an early 19th century harlequinade British pantomime, not to be too technical, whose white face style became so popular that clowns of this type were called joeys, which is a term still used by clowns today. The circus clown of the 19th and early 20th centuries, and later Bozo, Pennywise, and many more, were inspired by Grimaldi's look. Grimaldi may have also inadvertently contributed to the trope of the sad clown, as his celebrated and sensationalized life met a tragic end when he died a lonely alcoholic after the death of his wife and a failed suicide pact with his son, who was also a famous clown. French mime Jean-Gaspard Dubarreau, who created an influential Pierrot character whose name was Pierrot, performed throughout early 19th century France. He was a drug addict who beat a young boy to death in the street with a stick after the boy called him Pierrot. So the origins of the sad clown and the killer clown go back much further than the 20th century. It's worth mentioning, while we're on the topic of mimes and white-faced clowns, that mimes and mime-like characters also date back to ancient times and are seen in both Indian and Japanese traditions. They were distinguished in ancient Roman theater from other types of characters by the absence of masks, and for once in this presentation, they were portrayed by both male and female performers. Mimes are silent entertainers that we associate with street theater and busking. Popularized by Marcel Marceau, heavyweights like Charlie Chaplin, the Marx Brothers, and other silent film stars of the early 20th century utilized this style. Clearly, David's performance as Art the Clown involves nothing but pantomiming, but we also see this traditional classic sense of miming in his performance as well. Not like the I'm trapped in a box miming, but that classical, comical, sort of graceful silent film style of influence. Maybe Ali should have told Art he had a great Pierrot costume, but that also seems to get you killed around here, so I guess we'll never know. As old world clown characters that were full of chaos and the wisdom of human nature faded in the 20th century, clowns became a mainstay of American circuses, taking on a somewhat narrower role as showmen, entertainers, and daredevils. Along with circus culture, we are introduced in art and concept to the modern hobo and tramp characters, which we touched on just a little bit before, which are some of my personal favorite kinds of clowns. So hobo and tramp clowns evoke distinctive imagery and represent the migratory nature of American life in the early 20th century, with figures who were down on their luck. Hobos representing a more positive outlook on life, so we usually saw them in smiling clown makeup, and then tramps representing a more pessimistic outlook on life, so clowns that were featured in frowning makeup. We see these types of characters in and out of costume, such as Charlie Chaplin's The Tramp in 1914, where he's not in clown makeup, and Red Skelton's The Clown in 1953, where he is in clown makeup. Most famously, Bozo the Clown and his friendly comedy variety show became America's clown sweetheart and a household name in the 1950s and 60s. Ronald McDonald became the mascot of McDonald's around the same time, and these made way for the birthday clown that first became popular in the 1960s and 70s. So we see a definitive shift from clowns as artistic and tragic figures to clowns as commercial assets. From here, we also see the trend of hospital clowns and Shriner clowns entering the chat. Shriner clowns are unpaid volunteers who perform at charity events specifically to comfort and entertain children, which to some of us is unfathomable, and they represent the Shriner organization. My Uncle Gary, also known as Shoefly, is a proud Shriner. And before we move on, I want to make sure I emphasize that the role of clowns in art, entertainment, religion, theater, and beyond has always served important social and political purposes. Clowns have always been political. Also, next time you see a professional clown out in the wild, at a party or circus, or wandering ominously along the side of the road, consider that much like with cosplay, that person has put a lot of time and thought into every aspect of their costume, and their choice of colors, makeup, and style likely reflects a distinctive homage to their favorite clowns and eras of clowning throughout history, which is really pretty cool. Modern clowns are bringing the artistic focus on vulnerability back to clowning while maintaining their classical showmanship. I also want to mention a few other famous clowns that might give you some more food for thought to research, look up, or have fun with after you watch this. They are Abbott and Costello, Buster Keaton, Clarabelle, who didn't speak and only honked a horn, Emmett Kelly, Evetta Matthews, a lady clown, and one more lady clown, thank heaven, Jim Carrey in just about any role, but especially I'd say The Mask, Rowan Atkinson as Mr. Bean, Sacha Baron Cohen as Borat, and even, Tim Robinson on I Think You Should Leave. Very nice. And there are also rodeo clowns, juggalos, and on a much more serious note, the sad and abhorrent history of blackface. On that note, let's move on to the symbology of clowns in pop culture and folklore. The Penguin Book of Symbols tells us that, as a universal symbol, the clown is traditionally the parodied image of the murdered king. He symbolizes the reversal of the role of kingship in speech, stance, and attributes. Absurdity is substituted for majesty, a total lack of authority for sovereignty, laughter for awe, and defeat for victory. The clown character is the opposite facet of reality, expressing the inner conscience in all its many facets. The clown as buffoon is sometimes also a scapegoat, which can either be an expression of or a protest of prejudice. Blackface is perhaps the clearest expression of scapegoat prejudice, as well as the exaggerated facial features we see in things like cartoons, costumes, masks, and mascots that are intended to mock physical cultural stereotypes. Let's go back now and take a closer look at clowns as tricksters. The trickster myth appears across just about every world mythology and cosmology. The trickster is a precursor to both hero and villain stories. He represents chaos, cleverness, and living in the margins. He is neither fully good nor evil, and he's unpredictable, causing others around him to transform for better and for worse. The duality of the trickster keeps more powerful beings on edge. When monotheistic religions came into power with stringent concepts of good and evil, the mercurial nature of the trickster became less helpful and relatable and more devilish and eviler. Many North American indigenous cultures have trickster figures, often represented by the coyote or raven. The crow is also the primary trickster figure in Australian Aboriginal cultures. In European folklore, tricksters are primarily represented by the bear, fox, and wolf. These animals play a dual role in folklore through creation and mischief, as clowns play a dual role in harboring wisdom and causing mischief or causing chaos. Anansi is a trickster spider god from West Africa who can be wise and helpful to humans, weaving wisdom from its webs, but is also cunning and will take advantage of others to outwit bigger creatures. Robin Hood is an interesting example of a folkloric figure, perhaps based on a real person, who used trickery to outwit his enemies. He is also benevolent when it comes to, as we all know, robbing from the rich and giving to the poor, so he can display goodness when it suits him. And, notably, in the Disney cartoon version of the story, Robin Hood is portrayed as a fox. Leprechauns are, of course, classic tricksters, as well as the Fae. I have actually a whole other presentation on gnomes and elementals and have written a lot on this topic and have even seen one in real life myself. So if that strikes your fancy, hit me up on the socials and we'll chat more about that some other time. Some female examples of tricksters are the sirens of Greek mythology and the kitsune of Japanese lore, who are also foxes that can transform into beautiful women. Women, of course, are the most treacherous creatures of all. And finally, there are demons, which is an extremely broad and cross-cultural concept, but highly worth noting. Thinking beyond many of our traditional, maybe Christian upbringings, for those of us who had them, demons are complex, highly intelligent beings who can be helpful or harmful and are sometimes one and the same. They can lead you to madness or salvation, and that choice generally lies with you. So that may sound familiar to us as we think about the Terrifier. Art the Clown becomes a supernatural being at some point, aided by two female demons, or one demon embodying two females, the little pale girl and Vicky. It isn't specified, but there is a lot of Christian imagery throughout Terrifier that expresses the archetypal battle between good and evil, with Art and Sienna as opposing forces. My personal favorite trickster aspect of Art is that he's highly unpredictable. I guess that's stating the obvious, but sometimes he'll turn a kill into an elaborate opportunity to go ham on someone for what feels like ages, and other times he just pulls out a gun and shoots them right in the head. Other notable tricksters include the Loa in voodoo, Baron Samedi being my favorite one, which are often syncretized to Catholic saints, as well as the Jinn of Arabic lore, Loki, Peter Pan, and the Pied Piper. I know there are so many more, believe me, but this is supposed to be a 20-minute presentation. Before we move on, let's examine the timeless archetype of the Fool and the Fool's journey just a teeny bit. In the tarot, the Fool is the first card of the major arcana, numbered 0, usually depicting a man or boy in bright clothes holding a white rose in one hand and a small bundle in the other, with a dog or cat at his heels. He is shown looking up at the sky, not paying attention where he's going, almost as if he's about to walk or fall off the edge of a cliff. In the esoteric world, clowns might be syncretized to the Fool, who is a wanderer, energetic, and ubiquitous. He lives on in our modern playing cards as the Joker, where he still kind of shakes things up. The Joker connects two worlds, the everyday contemporary world and our magical inner world. The Fool, court jester, trickster, and circus clown are almost always distinctly marked by the loneliness of a wise person. Hence the term, ignorance is bliss. Now, the moment you've all been waiting for, let's move closer to understanding the evolution of the killer clown motif. So, speaking of jokers, the modern archetype of the killer clown can arguably be traced to 1940 and may be the little-known and deeply obscure character that most of us have probably never heard of, and that would be DC Comics' The Joker. In the 1970s and 80s, largely thanks to serial killer John Wayne Gacy and Stephen King's It, we finally see the full emergence of what we're all here for, the evil or killer clown. Before we get to Gacy, a weird footnote in evil clown history is the story of Sam the Sandown Clown, and I'm assigning this to you as homework. Sam the Sandown Clown was a being dressed like a clown who was encountered by two young children on vacation at Lake Camien in Sandown on the Isle of Wight in May 1973. It is a wild and fun story. So, most likely, the quintessential killer clown origin story can be traced to serial killer John Wayne Gacy, who raped, tortured, and killed at least 33 young men in the Norwood Park neighborhood of Chicago, not far from where I live, burying many of them in his crawl space. Gacy was a child killer who dressed up as Pogo the Clown and Patches for children's birthday parties and local parades. He undoubtedly represents a real-life boogeyman. To be clear, he never dressed as a clown for his crimes, but he did later famously say to the detectives, "A clown can get away with murder." Professional clowning organizations have said many times over that Gacy's style of clown makeup was highly inappropriate for entertaining children, as a true clown would never paint sharp corners as he did for his twisted clown smile, only soft ones. I live in Chicago, like I said, and I have driven past Gacy's former property on several occasions. His house was torn down years ago, and a new house with a different address was built over top of it. There is no crawl space in the newer home, but there is a basement. And for many in Chicago, it's still too soon to even talk about Gacy because so many people's lives were touched by the horror and losses of his crimes. In the aftermath of Gacy, evil and killer clowns began popping up all over the place in horror and pop culture. Gacy's killer clown may have inspired or partly inspired Stephen King's Pennywise, although King has never explicitly said so. It was written in 1981 and published in 1986. King has mentioned that the story was first conceived in 1978, which was the same year that Gacy was arrested. He was arrested in December 1978. Other nefarious clowns emerged throughout the 80s and early 90s in books, film, and television shows, such as Are You Afraid of the Dark?, Beetlejuice. He's a trickster, so I'll count him in. Funhouse, Goosebumps, It, not only the book, but the made-for-TV movie that, safe to say, shaped the nightmares of many of our childhoods. Killer Clowns from Outer Space, and I would even argue the Max Headroom signal hijacking incident that happened in Chicago in 1987. So many gems from Chicago, even Bozo from WGN. Poltergeist, and The Simpsons' Krusty the Clown, who was maybe not nefarious, but certainly troubled. There's even an evil clown in The Brave Little Toaster, which, sorry to both it and Terrifier, is by far probably the most disturbing film I've ever seen. I want to make a special mention of Homie the Clown, who was a character in the In Living Color series in the early 90s, but also an authentic urban legend that circulated around, you guessed it, here in Chicago, when my husband, who was born and raised here, was a teen. More recent killer clowns have been featured on shows like American Horror Story, in films like Hell House, and on YouTube, such as Wrinkles the Clown, who sparked enough debate to warrant a documentary film. With a special shout out, of course, to Captain Spaulding of Rob Zombie canon. And for those who love to travel, today you can pay a visit to the Clown Motel in Tonopah, Nevada. Clown Motel, incidentally, was also the name of a movie released in 2016. The year 2016 is pivotal to our journey in clown lore and was a major, if not the major, year for clowns. In 2016, the Great Clown Panic, also known as the Creepy Clown Craze, swept through the United States and became a worldwide phenomenon. People were spotting clowns everywhere from bustling suburban streets to desolate roadsides, along the highway and deep in the woods. Some people believed it was all part of a major publicity stunt for the upcoming 2017 remake of Stephen King's It, while other people reported actually being attacked, harassed, or harmed by the clowns they encountered. Incidentally, the craze faded around Halloween 2016, chased closely by the world premiere of Terrifier at the Telluride Horror Show on October 15, 2016. Coincidence? One wonders. For this presentation, if it's not clear already, I'm focusing primarily on the most recent iteration of the film series, Terrifier 1 through 3. And just to cross my T's and dot my I's, Terrifier 1 finally got a limited theatrical release in the US on March 15, 2018 by Epic Pictures Releasing. Now, let's have a look at the perception of clowns at present, examining the Terrifier films as safe spaces for the exploration, particularly for women, of violence, trauma, sex, and the universal need for community. Let's begin with a fitting quote by poet Caesar A. Cruz. "Art should comfort the disturbed and disturb the comfortable." Nothing seems truer than the relationship of fans to the Terrifier franchise and our beloved Art the Clown. Horror has forever been an outlet for the exploration and processing of trauma and societal taboos. As is true with clowns, and in the world of ghost lore, monsters, alien encounters, and urban legends, the fear icons of our time are blindingly beautiful reflections of ourselves and the social and political climates we find ourselves in. As we've seen, clowns have already been used quite a bit in horror. We are in an era now where pop culture fans are loving their reboots, their re-examinations, and their throwbacks, making space for a new and fresh take on the killer clown and for a franchise like Terrifier. The fear of clowns is quite common, called coulrophobia. I conducted an informal survey on Facebook, very informal, asking friends and followers if they were afraid of clowns as children. Around 20 people said yes, they were, while 25 people actually said no. Of the people who said yes, The majority were born after evil or killer clowns had already become prevalent in pop culture. Later, I asked on Facebook as well as Threads, which I had recently joined, if people who were afraid of clowns as children still didn't like them. On Facebook, everyone agreed they still did not like clowns. But on Threads, where I'm primarily connected with people in the Terra fam, I got a more colorful palette of responses. And I just want to share some of my favorite Facebook survey responses, primarily from people age 40 like me and older. My reactions to clowns were comedy and pathos. Maybe it's because when we were kids, clowns hadn't appeared as horror in the media. We were thinking Emmett Kelly. My mom wanted to be a clown. Her license plate was Clown 3. The only clown I liked was Bozo. Keep in mind that I lived about 5 minutes away from Gacy. He pretty much ruined clowns. Those poor kids. Shelley Wells of the old Baraboo Inn, and remember Baraboo is Circus City, said, "Clowns where I grew up were happy. My dad owned businesses and made pens that said, 'A city where they found enough clowns to start a circus.'" And then Amy, another old Baraboo Inn regular, said, "Afraid? No, but I did not like clowns at all. My dislike is rooted in seeing shadowy figures that pretended to be clowns when I was a child." Now, I love this response for so many reasons, and I could do a whole other video presentation on this alone, but I just want to say that I've heard stories like this throughout my career. When I was a kid, I even had an invisible friend, in quotation fingers, that was a Muppet. A scary Muppet that was big and blue and had a gaping mouth full of sharp teeth. Children are highly attuned to scary things. You see a lot of young kids cosplaying Terrifier characters, for instance. And it's interesting, if you believe in the paranormal, certain entities seem to present themselves to children as things they either don't expect them to fear, or especially hope they will fear. Sam the Sandown Clown is a good example of this. Just food for thought. Moving on, here are some of my favorite Threads responses, primarily from people age 40 and under. "I never was afraid of clowns necessarily, but I wouldn't say I liked them either. Now I like them for the most part. I am actually a bigger fan of spooky clowns, like the kind you'd see in a haunted house. Clowns that you'd see at a kid's birthday party are still not my favorite. I always loved black and white clowns and jesters. I had a Pierrot that I carried around in my late teens. Meanwhile, my younger sister is terrified of clowns. I almost convinced her to watch Terrifier after she saw the actor being a normal person first." Funny enough, my husband Jonathan refused to get a photo with Art the Clown at Days of the Dead, but when I showed him a photo of David, he said, "Okay, cool, I'll do it." But my favorite Threads answer came from Jib Jib the Clown. Wherever you are, thank you. "There is beauty in the absurd. Artificial shackles and meaning and roles and rules and expectations and requirements and late payments and symbols and dietary restrictions and opinions only affect a clown so far as they choose. Clowns are on the other side, a mirror to the imaginary world where people choose to suffer. I think that is what scares people. They cannot control them and don't know what to expect." I adore this answer so much. Clowncore, a word that I recently learned, has emerged as an aesthetic centered around all things clowns. Clowncore is all about childhood nostalgia, joy, and personal expression. I interviewed clown cosplayer extraordinaire, Bailey Camien, who is on Instagram, Threads, and TikTok at clowny_Bales. Keep in mind all of these, any resources, any social media connections, and other fun things to check out will all be included at the end of the video as well. And I got the most beautifully insightful responses about her relationship with the world of clowns and Terrifier. I asked her to share some of her favorite cosplay photos with me here on the screen, and I'll read my favorite responses. "I have loved clowns ever since I can remember. I am a ginormous fan of Halloween and have always gone all out with my costumes, but secretly hated waiting a year because I love dressing up so much. It wasn't until recently, being active in the indie horror community, that I found my confidence with cosplaying and dressing up whenever I feel like it. I've been doing clown makeup since middle school, but I've been more in tune with it now that I have found some confidence in my self-expression. I can relate to clowns. Their job is to make others happy. I put on the happy face or face paint and play with the character to give others a laugh or smile. It's a way for me to escape reality. It may sound a bit sad, but it's the truth. I've always been on the outside, or felt like the weird one. But clowns are so quirky and beautiful, they make me love my weird and quirky sides and not feel ashamed to be my best self. Art is by far my favorite horror clown and horror villain. That's all thanks to David Howard Thornton. David has made Art a literal icon and such a lovable sicko for the fandom to bond over. David is the master of physical acting, playing a completely silent character with perfectly placed comedic timing. His evil death stares are my favorite. One of my favorite things David's ever said about Art is that normal clowns make other people happy, but Art makes other people suffer to make himself happy. Terrifier has opened me up to the world of indie horror. It's so inspiring to see people put their hard work and passion into these films. I have a massive respect now for practical effects. Being part of the Terrifier community has impacted my life. I have bonded with and made so many friends. I even met my boyfriend through it, and it feels like I have a family of people who don't make me feel bad for being obsessed with horror. I finally have people to geek out with and share stories and bond with. I am extremely grateful to have met David and that we can interact with him on social media on a daily basis. I have a new love for conventions and meeting these amazing people. This fandom is everything. I am forever grateful. That's the word, folks. Thank you so much, Bailey. Focusing on the franchise itself, in some ways, Terrifier feels like it could have been directed by John Waters in the 1970s. Speaking of the 1970s and the advent of slasher icons, one thing that really works about Art is he's an icon in progress, someone new to be excited about, and who doesn't come with pre-packaged expectations like other beloved horror villains. As I mentioned earlier, Art steps outside of traditional slasher tropes by using a variety of weapons, sometimes engaging in prolonged torture, and other times simply blowing his victims to smithereens. The first full-length Terrifier film, with a premiere in 2016 and limited release in 2018, bookended the return of It. In 2024, Terrifier 3 was meant to ride the coattails of Joker Folie à Deux. Surprisingly, audiences chose the evil clown extraordinaire Art over the incel idol Arthur Fleck. My understanding is that Joker 2 was, in fact, poking some fun at its edgelord audience/influence, but maybe also to its detriment. But that people still generally appreciated that, even if they didn't like the movie. I myself did not see it, so I'm out of my depth with that. From a business perspective, the pandemic era made way for non-traditional films from beyond the same old major studios to have a chance at making it big. The pandemic also introduced us to the era of violent comfort watches as acceptable mainstream entertainment. Now, many of us nerds have always found comfort in horror, of course, but the memes and tropes around the simple joys of a good true crime podcast really came to the fore during the pandemic, especially with women. And with the growing popularity of streaming services, we've also now seen Shudder and Streambox bring horror to life at home and give fans easy access to watch, explore, and connect. I now want to introduce my special guest, fellow folklorist Ari Spence, on Instagram and TikTok at legally_haunted. I chatted with her about the transformation of the Terrifier franchise from underground indie horror gem to box office smash. Here is part of my interview with her, the rest of which will be shared later on my YouTube channel at Amelia M. Cotter. I love this. I love this so much. I have just a few questions for you. I'm just going to let you go and do your thing. So something I think we've all noticed with the Terrifier franchise very, very recently is that it's kind of, it's blown up into this cultural phenomenon. And there is a running joke in the community that, Art the Clown and Vicky and many of the characters, but certainly Art the Clown has become sort of like this like yassified, cool, fun, like cutesy kind of like killer that people are endeared by. And he's become a sex symbol in a way as well, in a big way. And so I know that you are a fellow folklore, a horror, a spooky stuff enthusiast. And I wanted to get your take on that, on the sudden popularity of the Terrifier franchise, this mainstream popularity, and also just the sex appeal as well.
So I think that Terrifier took people by surprise because it's not your typical slasher movie. It harkens back to a lot of what we reminisce about from like the 80s, Michael Myers, Jason Voorhees, all those, profound serial killer types that we would see in mainstream horror. But it takes a different spin on it because you can actively see how it draws influence from non-horror ideas. Very much like whenever you see David's performance, you can point out, oh, that's Charlie Chaplin. Oh, that's Buster Keaton. All these big silent film types and tropes that we are so used to. And I feel like that's also part of the reason why he's become, yassified and sexualized, because if you look at those movies, even though they're putsy kind of characters, somehow they generally end up with the pretty girl at the end, right? And even within the Terrifier franchise, we see this romantic side of Art, because in the first one with Vicky, he goes over to the little gumball machine toy dispenser, and he gets that little ring, and he gets down on his knees, and he's all cute about it. When I was 16, I couldn't even get some guy to take me to the movies kind of situation, but here's this creepy clown going out of his way to be romantic to this girl that he finds. And I also think that it's part physiological, right? Because the line between arousal and fear is a lot closer than what we like to think it is.
Yes.
So we're kind of diving into that primal part of ourselves where our brain is confused. I also think that the confusion is further layered because once David takes off the Terrifier and Art the Clown makeup, he's such a wholesome individual. Like, you want to take him home to mom. You want to introduce him to your parents. So there's that cognitive dissonance between the character and the actor that just culminates into the actual franchise itself. I feel the characters are more accessible because they're more holistic. They're not either totally good or totally evil. We get to see that natural variation, especially within someone like Serena, right? Where you get to see her be the badass hero, but then you get to see her struggle with her mental health and the implications of that. And I love the scene in the third movie where she absolutely just cracks on that podcaster, because that was from
very real. Yeah.
That's a real thing, how we take these stories and these people and we forget they're human, right? We can see it how a lot of people are interacting with the cast themselves of Terrifier, forgetting that these are people. This is their job, right? And they're sharing their gifts with us. But once the camera stops, they are people and humans just like the rest of us. So it gave almost a meta insight into the life of being one of those big actors. I think it's become more self-aware. I don't think it's inherently a feminist franchise per se. Because if you look at the first one in isolation, it has the typical tropes that we see in any slasher film, right? You go after the woman, somehow one of the women survive becoming the final girl, right? It's not really until the second and third one where we see Sienna come through as this Ash Williams type of character, overcoming the stereotypes and the evil, that we start to see more of a feminist interpretation of it. But on the other hand, there's also a lot of violence against women. Like, I still am haunted by the shard of glass scene with Vicky. I,
Yeah.
I out loud in the theater said, well, that's ruined the next 3 months for me. What I also very much enjoy about the franchise is that while it hits on all these things that we would classify as woke, it doesn't feel woke because
Right.
it's not forced. It's a very natural
Yeah, it's not performative.
progression.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah, it's like because you
in
can see where the influences came from, and you're just embodying these larger archetypes that aren't necessarily gendered, but instead of it being the stereotypical strong male character, now we're seeing all those archetypes we would typically see in a male being
yeah.
portrayed in the female. And I'm not a gore person in general. I came across Terrifier when I was horrendously sick, like two or 3 years ago, and I was just in the mood for a bad horror movie. I was
Mhm.
like, I want to watch something that I can look at and say, this is awful. And I was just like, this is a creepy clown. I'm like, this can't be good. And I just remember watching it, and I didn't watch any of the gore at first because I can't stomach that stuff, even
Mhm.
still, generally. But I just remember watching Art as a character and thinking to myself, what is this guy's problem? Like, I need to know more
Right.
about why he's like where did he come from? What is his MO? Because he doesn't seem to have a typical type.
I love that you said that so much, because that is another thing. That's another really great point, is that one of the complaints sometimes is that, like, it has no plot and there's no backstory and we don't know. And I'm like, that is one of my favorite parts, is that, like, sometimes things make sense and sometimes things make no sense. And I actually really love that. I love the mystery quality. It is in itself a clown and buffoon and trickster quality to have the film go in all sorts of different directions and not necessarily meet expectations or make sense to you. And I enjoy not knowing, like, Art's backstory. I know that we might get to that in Terrifier 4, but, like, for me, it's just like, it can be totally nonsensical. I've always loved horror, but this has changed my outlook on horror. It's like what I said before, when I turn on the movie, I'm going on someone's journey. This is someone's art project, no pun intended. And this is somebody's film. I'm in part of their experience and their story now, and I'm just on board, I'm not going to judge, right? I'm just going to go. So I love that.
I agree. I think it's definitely one of those things, and you can pick it apart so well, right? Because it has so many open-ended questions. Something that I tell my students all the time is the author, the writer, the director, the whoever, whatever, text we're discussing or covering, they don't owe us anything. We are on their artistic journey. And there might be reasons why they're withholding information. They might be wanting us to fill in those blanks, to leave room for discussion. And I think that's something that Damien really handled well in the first one, and has really taken a great journey on throughout the extension of the franchise.
Yeah.
Because he's able to because it was so open-ended, he can go, okay, I want to take it this way, and then I want to take it this way, and I want to take it this way. And he left himself room to
Yeah.
develop these characters in a wide variety of directions.
That was awesome. Thank you again so much, Ari. I just want to take a few minutes to cover some more ground before we wrap up. I imagine that much of the success of the franchise and its ability to reach a wider audience, inviting people to join the art party, can be credited to the folks in charge of Terrifier's social media. I'm getting positive flashbacks to about 10 years ago when the Babadook was declared a gay icon. Terrifier 3's social media marketing has had the same kind of whimsical feel to it, and alongside the handing out of barf bags and showing headlines about who fainted and walked out and such, these all together seem to strike just the right balance with fans. I used to personally be uncomfortable with what I felt was torture porn, and stayed away from Terrifier for a long time for that reason. So I'm a relatively recent convert to the franchise. I did love horror when I was much younger, but I also turned away from it because the community 20 years ago wasn't really a welcoming environment for girls. Now, I've found through Facebook groups and various social media platforms and pages where I lurk for research purposes, of course, that the fan base is strongly made up of women, especially young women and neurodivergent people. And I think there's another presentation about that specifically. This is remarkable for me and healing for me. I feel like I've come back in a sense after all these years to find a horror community that I always wanted to see and be part of. It seems like art became fully realized as weirdly adorable and charming with Terrifier 3. I've seen a lot of women remark about appreciating his attentiveness to detail and going so far as to jokingly call him the ideal man. He cleans up after himself, he does his own dishes, he does his own laundry, and he washes his hands after he pees. He did smear crap all over the walls of the bathroom in the first Terrifier film, but that was before he blew out the back of his head, was resurrected, and got that, that demonussy in him. So we also see a smidgen of Hannibal Lecter in art, where he seems to especially enjoy killing rude people, and I do feel like that is relatable. During the pandemic, I was reading a social media thread somewhere saying that women should no longer have fantasy crushes on specifically vampires because fantasizing about someone who wants to hurt you is to condone violence in real life. I understand the cultural moment we were in at that time, but I'm happy to see the pendulum swinging now in the other direction. With Terrifier 3 and probably before that, we've seen people freely and openly profess their love for Art the Clown. And even Damien has joked that when he was developing Art and Vicky as characters, he had no idea he was creating future sex symbols. So before I conclude, I dug deeper into this aspect of Art's allure and interviewed the lovely Art's whore on Instagram and Threads at arts.whore, and the O in whore is a 0. I got some great insight into the clown, kink, smut, and Terrifier. I asked her to share also one of her favorite smutty posts with me here on the screen, and as you can see, I liked it for research purposes only, of course. And I'll read my favorite responses from her. I am quite new to the Terrifier franchise. I knew nothing about it until I saw a few memes pop up on Facebook just before the release of Terrifier 3. I've always been a gore whore, so I thought I'd give it a whirl. I became hooked. I've always had a thing for masked men and the bad guys in films, so the second I saw Art, I knew I was going to be hooked. And here I am now, obsessed with yet another fictional character. As someone who is a great lover of dark, smutty fiction, I tend to take the unconventional and disturbing aspects of horror and associate them as being sexual, and then I write the smut that comes to mind. I'm sure some may find it weird and wrong, but everyone has their kinks. He's the perfect main character. He's tall, not strong, but you know he could hurt you. He's evil to the core, but you do feel for him at times. He's mysterious and speaks solely with his expressions, and that is sexy. Dave is truly so amazing at portraying Art that you forget it's actually him. Art has a dark side, yet he's quite playful and immature, which is attractive. It gives you the sense that you could be the one to change him, and that he could fall for you, even though you know he hates everyone, including himself, and would kill you in a heartbeat if given the chance. When he's covered in blood with that evil smile and staring eyes, it's so hot. But, as Dave said, Art is asexual, so we will never know, and that's why imagination is so great. The very first fan page I joined was the Art the Clown Appreciation Society on Facebook, and I loved it. I went to Instagram and Threads to create a smutty fan page in hopes of finding like-minded people, which I seem to have done. Everyone is so down to earth, supportive of each other, shares a mutual love of horror and practical effects, and is intensely invested and obsessed with this murderous, sexy clown. I personally enjoy the memes I come across, the plot theories, the cosplay, the artwork I see. There are so many very talented people in this fandom, and I have managed to find some great online friends through this disturbingly fucked up franchise. That, friends, brings us to our conclusion. In conclusion, clowns, including the killer clown, are a two-way mirror, reflecting back at us what we reflect at them. Clowns reveal our need for control and to release control, our desire to be understood and to be entertained through subversion, provocation, and fear. Clowns are foundational to the human experience and have always played important political, social, and spiritual roles. They are now, and have always been, also a little creepy. At the same time, horror has always provided an outlet for people to safely process, reclaim, and work through trauma, as well as explore taboos related to sex and violence. The Terrifier franchise and fandom has become a welcoming space for generations of people to embrace and own their fun, sexy, weird, and wild. Art the Clown is both a person and later a supernatural being, ordinary and extraordinary, a masked figure that is unknown and unknowable, both part of our world and a parallel world of illusions. He exists in the liminal space between our everyday reality and the imagination. He's the unbound ego. Art the Clown is the pinnacle of the evolution of the killer clown. This presentation has been short and sweet, giving you a high-level overview of complex figures, history, and ideas. If you have any questions or want to talk further, feel free to reach out to me on Facebook, Instagram, or Threads at Amelia M. Cotter. Visit my website at ameliacotter.com, or you can write to me anytime at ameliamcotter@gmail.com. I would like to thank Ari Spence, Bailey Camien, and Arts Horror for your invaluable insight, inspiration, and support for this presentation. I would like to thank Dr. Reese Goodall, Dr. Hannah Straw, and the University of Warwick for the opportunity, as well as the official Terrifier social media accounts, and David Howard Thornton for helping to spread the word. Love you, appreciate you. I'd especially like to thank Jonathan Montgomery Pollock for the moral and technical support in producing this video essay, and for putting up with what probably amounts to my cute little midlife crisis hyperfixation. Lastly, a heartfelt thank you to everyone in the Terrifier fan community and everyone involved in the Terrifier films for making this presentation both possible and relevant. And thank you all for watching. Mwah! Is that good?